Over 42 years ago, a comic was released that would create an earthquake in the world of publishing. Well, a small ripple. Well, okay. Virtually no impact at all on anything.
Wow, it's new. Wow, it's fun. Wow, it's wow.
Wow, the new Fun Pack comic with the young Dracula, Adam and his ants, and spare part kit, plus a free funny face for those crazy looks. Wow's out now.
Wow, wow, wow.
Back in 1982, the children's comic market was flooded with well-established titles like the Beano, the Dandy, Buster, Beezer, Whizzer and Chips, and it was dominated by two main players, DC Thompson and IPC magazines. At that time, I was 8 years old. Usually every Saturday I'd go to the local newsagent and pick up a comic. But what comic that would be would vary from week to week. Around that time, I remember my dad showing me his collection of Beezer comics, and he collected them from the very first issue. The collection spanned about 4 years. He'd started it when he was about 12 and ended it when he was about 16. So when he was getting a bit old for comics, I guess. So that was roughly about 1960. And Beezer itself actually continued until 1993. So it had a pretty long run. Nearly 40 years. And who can forget such memorable characters as... Actually, do I remember any Beezer characters? Minnie the Minx? No. Was that the Dandy? Beano? Anyway, when I saw the advert for Wow Comic on TV, I was excited because I could be there at the beginning of another comic revolution. I mean, I'm sure 8-year-old me wouldn't have used that wording, but I definitely like the idea of having a comic from the first issue and building a collection. It seemed like a rare opportunity and a limited window. And so it came to pass that on a visit to the local newsagent, Hereward News, and upon seeing a final copy of issue 1 of Wow, I made an imploring speech to my mum to let me buy it. I can't remember why she said I couldn't. I think perhaps I'd used all my pocket money for the week, or I'd used up my comic buying quota for the weekend. But I do remember making a scene in the shop and dropping to my knees and begging my mum to let me buy it. It looked lonely and unloved on that newsagent's shelf, already tatty and dog-eared, no doubt from being moved around and rejected in favour of other comics. It was, in my eyes, already the underdog of comics. That would make it something that was just for me and all the more special. And so my mum finally caved and let me buy it. It had a number of interesting comic strips and played with some interesting concepts. First issue contained an origin story for most of the characters. Memorable stories, ones like Spare Part Kit, which is about a kid who'd come into possession of a set of bionic limbs. I think it was a bit of a cross between $6 Million Man and Inspector Gadget. Barney's Badges, a boy with a jacket covered in badges that had magical powers. Back in the 1980s, wearing lots of badges was much more of a thing, so kids probably found it more relatable. Adam and his ants, a story about a kid with an army of ants that would get him in and out of various scrapes. Given that it was 1982, I assume the title and the idea was a cash-in on the band Adam and the Ants. However, from doing a bit of research recently, looking on Wikipedia, it seems it was initially a reprint of a story from the 1970s comic Core, renamed from Andy's Ants. So they retitled it to coincide with the current zeitgeist. Very clever. Now, my memory of Core will have relevance to how this story ends. I remember Core by 1982 was a defunct comic, along with the likes of Jackpot, which had already been absorbed by Buster Comic and various other comics that had failed to set the world alight, Core had been cancelled. Remember the last few years of primary school, our classroom had a cupboard full of old comics. I used to trawl through this while waiting for the school bus to take me home. And Core was amongst them, but I don't remember much else about it. From my research for this item, though, I see it ended in 1974, year I was born. And that was after a 4-year run. And it died at the hands of, drum roll, Buster, the same comic that absorbed Jackpot some years later. If I recall correctly, Buster would also absorb another of my favourite comics from the 1980s, a fairly forgotten comic called School Fun. Buster was maybe the granddaddy of the IPC stable and managed to survive several years, hence it was chosen to merge with various other comics. I think it started about 1960. I haven't bothered checking that, but I've got a memory of an anniversary issue in the 80s where they gave away a facsimile of the first issue with it. Anyway, I digress. Back to WoW comic. There were quite a few good stories. Shipwreck School was another one, and I remember quite liking it. As the title suggests, it's about a class and their teacher who end up stranded on a desert island. In a poll of WoW comic readers, Shipwreck School was voted the most popular story. It was the front cover story, which might have helped, so it was kind of to WoW what Dennis the Menace was to the Beano. There was also a comic strip called KBR, which stood for Kids Band Radio. The concept of that was basically a bunch of kids using CB radios. Perhaps due to the popularity of that story, WoW had a letters page called KBR Corner, in which readers were encouraged to send in letters and to use the lingo that featured in the comic strip, much like the normal CB radio lingo. Breaker, breaker, 10-4, and all that jazz. And regarding that page, it was in issue 25 of WoW comic that something momentous happened. I had a letter published. I remember vividly being at the home of an elderly neighbour who my mum was talking to in her kitchen, and I was reading the WoW comic that I just picked up from the newsagent. Every Saturday they'd reserve me my copy of WoW. Do you remember those little coupons they used to have in comics where they'd say, take this to your local newsagent and ask them to reserve this comic? Well, I only did that once, and then subsequent weeks they just reserve it for me. Anyway, when I saw my letter on the KBR letters page, I was euphoric, to say the least. I let out a delighted scream and ran into the kitchen to tell my mum and Mrs. Rogers, I've had my letter published in WoW! I was greeted with annoyance, though, because they thought the scream meant I'd injured myself. I would do the scream for you now, but I don't think the microphone would take it. Mrs. Rogers was clutching her chest in horror. Oh, don't do that. I thought something awful had happened. She died the following year from a stroke. It was a huge moment for me, though. The letter, I mean, not the old woman dying. I'm reluctant to share what was in the letter as it was so random. Basically wanted to get my own CB radio, so in the parlance used in the comic strip, I asked, where can I get a rig? My mind is in a maze. Which is basically saying, how can I get my own CB radio? I'm confused, because I really did want a CB or a walkie-talkie or anything like that. There was more to that letter, but they didn't publish all of it. I can't remember what else I wrote. They also didn't publish my surname, but they did publish the name of the village I lived in, so I was pretty okay with that. There was another Simon living in that village, but he wasn't a WoW comic reader, so I think I could prove it was me. A few of the other things that stick in my memory. Star turns. This included photos of celebs with speech bubbles of them telling jokes that readers had sent in. The main thing I remember about that was most weeks they'd have a celeb telling you what their real name was. So I remember a picture of Adamant with a speech bubble saying, "Hi, I'm Stuart Goddard," as well as one of Cliff Richard saying, "Hi, I'm Harry Webb." Terrible Cliff Richard impression. And there was probably one of Elton John saying, "I'm Reg Dwight." In fact, I think I remember there was. So it was educational. There was also a feature called TV Quiz Kids, which would have puzzles, but done as a parody of quiz shows of the time. Another one which didn't, for some reason, didn't merit a Wikipedia mention was a feature called Just Testing, because Wikipedia as on the page, the feature for WoW has got a name check for most of the features that were in WoW comic, but for some reason this one didn't get mentioned. It was quite a big one. So yeah, Just Testing, where kids would compare products like sweets and toys. I used to enjoy reading that. It was quite feature heavy for a comic, but probably had about the same balance as other comics. I don't really remember. As we're talking about features, I suppose the elephant in the room when it comes to WoW comic is its centerfold feature. For about the first 6 months of WoW's existence, the center pages had a feature from WoW's very own celebrity columnist, a children's entertainer, an Australian children's entertainer with a beard and sometimes a third leg. It also contained a comic strip called Rolf's Magic Brushes. And in fact, I did actually have some of Rolf's Magic Brushes. They used to give them away in the comic as part of competitions, but I don't think I ever won them. I think I got my parents to buy me some, and they were basically these plastic brushes that the handles were filled with paint, different colour paint, and you would squeeze the brush to get the paint out, and they didn't last very long. Mine dried up, the nozzles got all clogged. Anyway, we don't want to get into that. Thankfully, that article was replaced by another comic strip. I think that was what Family Trees replaced, which was a comic strip about a family of walking, talking trees, and that remained until the comic ended. Which brings me to one day in 1983 where I collected my comic of WoW from the newsagents and went to read it as usual. But the centre pages contained something different this week. Great news for all readers! I was still only 9 years old at the time, but I think I had a terrible feeling what that meant, as I'd probably seen it before. That issue number 56 of WoW, was to be the last. The great news for all readers was a familiar headline whenever a comic was being ended. And it was always the same drill. Now I just wondered which comic was going to absorb WoW. The article goes on to say, next week, all these great comic characters will be joining forces with WoW's comic characters. I recognised the characters, and they were from Whoopee comic. For a brief moment, I thought that Whoopee was the one that was getting the chop. Perhaps WoW would continue and Whoopee was going to end. But no, my worst fears were confirmed. I'd long suspected that WoW wasn't the big hit with other kids that it was with me. I think I was the only person in my circle reading it. And they published my letter. I'd long suspected a lot of the letters were made up and that they were short on readers. I just had a sense of it. And the final insult, the following week, I expected my newsagent to reserve me a copy of the newly merged Whoopee and WoW, as it would become known. But they hadn't, of course, because WoW had technically ended, so they didn't reserve anything. I did buy Whoopee and WoW for a little while and carried on reading the WoW stories that had survived the merger, but it wasn't the same. My beloved comic had gone. The only small consolation was I had a complete collection of every issue because it had only run for just over a year. There would also be annuals and summer specials, even though there was no longer a weekly ongoing issue of WoW. For some reason, this went on for a few more years. In fact, I believe the last WoW annual was published in 1986. I kept buying this, of course, even long after I'd stopped buying comics. And I've still got my collection of WoW comics. And obviously quite a few people did buy them, as they're always on eBay. Unless, of course, those are unsold back issues. And the reason I've been thinking about this lately is because my nephew, who is now 9 years old, has just started getting into comics himself. And so naturally, I saw this as an opportunity to educate him on the wonders of WoW comic. Not surprisingly, his favourite story seems to be Shipwreck School as well. Some of the humour is dated. It can be pretty politically incorrect in places. For example, the teacher's often seen chasing the pupils with a cane, as we're still a couple of years away from abolition of corporal punishment then. But it's still a good read. So, after over 40 years away, I'm enjoying revisiting WoW, a comic that was tragically taken before its time. Right, we need to talk about Facebook. What is going on with Facebook? Just the state of it recently. Putting to one side the thing that's going on at the moment with Zuckerberg and the way he's aligned himself with that lunatic in the White House. Just are they just trying to get rid of all their customers? Are they just trying to shut up shop? Because it seems to me that it's unusable now. Right, if you go on there and you just want to kill some time and just scroll the news feed and just see what's going on, you're mostly not going to see anything to do with anybody you know, or you're going to see it peppered with little updates and maybe something from last week, a week ago or something, where it's too late to comment on it. But you're seeing more and more. I'll tell you what you see most of. I'm starting to see, and I don't know about you, I'm starting to see a lot of AI slop, right? So I'm talking about, and this is the common one I keep seeing, and you tell me if you're seeing the same thing. It will be an AI generated picture, not always immediately obvious that it's AI, I'll grant you that, but it will be an AI generated picture of a grandma with a birthday cake. And then the caption will be something along the lines of, oh, it's my birthday and nobody's here to wish me a happy birthday, so I baked my own cake. And then tons and tons of, the depressing thing is, you go into that post and you look at the comments, and it's comment after comment after comment, and some of them will be bots themselves, I should think, not rather than humans, but it'll be just comment after comment after comment, and they're all saying things like, oh, have a blessed day, oh, God bless you, oh, so sad, oh, just God bless you, God bless you, God bless you. And the people commenting actually annoy me more than the actual AI garbage itself, because how dumb are these people, right? How stupid do you have to be? I get there's a lot of naive people out there that use the internet, and Facebook is more of an it's an older person's tool now, isn't it? A lot of young people aren't going near it, but yeah, it's just pages and pages of these people commenting, or it'll be a picture of. I'll tell you what another one is. Another one I keep seeing, a recurring one, or different. They're using different pictures every time, but it's the same theme, right? People will get wise to this eventually, right? Because it's just starting to happen, and people will realise that there's a common theme. But one with a couple, and it will be like a sepia photograph of them as as children together, and then the picture after it will be an up to date photograph, and they probably look like they're in their 50s or something. But and it will say, they've been together since childhood. What a lovely story. And then I mean, there's plenty of people commenting and realising it's garbage, and saying things like, well, that sepia picture looks like it's from the 1920s, and yet the follow-up picture is obviously a recent picture, and they're in their 50s. Does something not add up there for you? But still, you've got all these people saying, "Oh, God bless you. Oh, how lovely." Oh, fuck off. Excuse my French, but it annoys me. And this is what dominates your news feed on Facebook. You keep seeing these appearing, and of course, Mark Zuckerberg has got rid of fact checking now, hasn't he? So there's going to be an open door for more and more of this sort of thing, where and this is just going to be the tip of the iceberg, right? They'll start putting loads of um, more. I guess it's fairly harmless what that is, but it's kind of ushering the way for more harmful, misleading material, I suppose, isn't it? Um, but yeah, and then if it's not AI stuff, then it'll be. And tell me if this rings true for you. It'll be you're having a conversation with somebody yesterday about something, and then the following day there's a sponsored ad, and it's something quite obscure, but it just so happens to coincide with the thing you were talking about yesterday. Um, so one example I can think of, this is a really obscure one, but I was having a conversation with somebody about funerals because I've been to a funeral, and I had a friend who was um, trying to decide whether to go to a funeral of somebody they didn't know that well, and we talked about imposter syndrome. If you go to a funeral and you're there and you kind of think, the vicar will be saying something like, everybody knew them so well, and everybody has their own story about this person. And then you're thinking, I haven't, I barely know them. So you kind of think imposter syndrome. So we had this conversation, and then within a couple of hours, I'm scrolling down Facebook, and it's got sponsored ad, John Culshaw on his new comedy tour, Imposter Syndrome. It's not a coincidence, is it? There was you see one thing like that and you say coincidence, but then there was one, just a most recent example I could think of was my colleague was listening to 10 to the Top on Radio 2, which is a music quiz, and one of the questions, I can't remember what the question was, but the answer was Jesus Jones, and I just went, Jesus Jones. My colleague went, what? And I said, Jesus Jones, that was Jesus Jones. A couple of hours later, I'm scrolling my newsfeed, and it's got the an advert for the Jesus Jones tour. They're touring with EMF, apparently. So, yeah. And I turned off. I've got an iPhone, and I turned off the thing in settings where it says, stop Siri being voice activated or stop it listening. I turned that off quite a while ago, but I honestly don't think it's made any difference. So, yeah, that's kind of how I'm feeling about Facebook. If anybody that knows me that's listening to this wonders why I don't do very much on Facebook anymore, unless it's to do with the band I'm in, that is a big part of it. It is becoming just an uninhabitable sewer now, Facebook, I think, and it's not somewhere I want to spend my time. And you could obviously say the same for X, I won't call it Twitter, but what was X is now unusable. I stopped. I haven't deleted my account on X, but I did stop posting or looking at it very much back in about August 2024, I think it was. So that is the end of that, and I will get around to deleting it, I think, because it's a horrible place. Whereas Blue Sky, which is where I am now, is much better at the moment. Anyway, at least it's quite a nice place to go and sort of read things. There's a lot of stuff about Trump, of course, and things like that. And people are saying, "Oh, come on, I've come here to get away from Trump and Elon Musk and stuff like that." But yeah, people will still post about it, including me, unfortunately. But yeah, Blue Sky is a much nicer place. So if you're not on there, I do recommend it. But yeah, that's it really. I've just come here to have a moan about Facebook and X. I'm not going to call it Twitter. But that's what I think about it. Let me know what you think.
Planet Rock Breakfast with Paul Anthony, the full English.
It's coming up to 7:40 here on Planet Rock, so time for the full English, and we go to Dave Norman from Cleethorpes, who's gone with his theme today, and he's requesting the full This Is Bullshit, because these songs are all on the Planet Rock playlist, and we'd have played them anyway, starting with Whiskey in the Jar by Thin Lizzy, followed by Highway Star by Deep Purple, and then for some reason, any old song by the Brothers Osborne. I see what you did there, Dave. Great way to blow your request. Here's your songs. Right, so let's talk about EastEnders then. Um, it's celebrating its 40th anniversary in February, and I've got to admit, I have been sucked back into watching it because of the anniversary. I swear, I've not watched it for a long time. It's been a good, I would say, 10 to 15 years since I've watched EastEnders properly. Um, but I think maybe every time they have an anniversary and they do lots of stuff, which is often referencing the golden years of EastEnders, and they do a live episode. I get reeled in, and I watch it for a little bit, and then go back to not watching it again. But I was a big EastEnders fan when I was a kid. There's a picture that I used to share on Twitter quite a lot when we were sharing photographs of ourselves on the Forgotten 80s hashtag and things like that, where I was at my nan's house. One of the most 1980s pictures you could have. It's from Christmas 1986. I was sat on my nan's sofa chair with a Philips moving sound, which was the Philips equivalent of a Sony Walkman, on over my ears, listening to Now 8. You can see Now 8 is on the arm of the chair, and holding an EastEnders annual. And I think I got an EastEnders annual Christmas '86, and I think I got an EastEnders annual for Christmas '87. I was a big fan of it. When it first started 40 years ago, I was keeping a diary at the time, and there is a diary entry for February the 19th, 1985, and it says EastEnders starts today. Now, you might wonder why I would bother to put a diary entry for that, because it was of no significance at the time, but the BBC had hyped the hell out of it. They've been doing a lot of trailers. It was seen as a big event because at the time, BBC didn't have a soap opera. So you had Coronation Street in Emmerdale on ITV. You had Brookside on Channel 4. You still had Crossroads on ITV, actually. And so it was seen as a big deal. And people were wondering whether it was going to succeed or fail. Oh, of course, ITV, not satisfied with the fact they got a soap already, tried to copy EastEnders, didn't they? Tried to mimic its success soon after it came out with a bit of a dead duck called Albion Market. I do remember watching a little bit of that, but it was pretty awful and it didn't last very long. But yeah, so I was a big EastEnders fan, certainly in the 80s. Stuck with it for many years, and right through to the Mitchell brothers and all that sort of that's malarkey. But yeah, I suppose it would be about 10, 15 years ago I stopped watching it. Around the time that they brought Dirty Den back, and the where it was getting a bit too gangstery, and they weren't very good at doing the gangster stuff, I didn't think, and it kind of took over the show. And I was pleased Dirty Den came back, but I kind of felt they kind of screwed the pooch on it. They didn't do a very good job of telling the story and justifying it. And then, of course, the stuff that happened with Leslie Grantham, where he was scandalised in the press for sucking his finger on a webcam, and then slagging everybody off in the cast. And I think it was Wendy Richard was the main one who got the worst of it, and she was kind of like a big deal at the time. And so even he couldn't get away with that, so they had to sack him. And then the handling of how they got rid of his character really stuck in my throat. I think it was really badly done. They turned him from this sort of lovable rogue into this just evil pantomime villain. And yeah, I don't think it's any judgment on Leslie Grantham's acting. I thought he was fine when he came back, and he was really good first time round. I really liked the character, but I think they really made a mess of that. Anyway, getting away from the negative stuff. So I do get dragged back into these things come anniversary time, and I've been watching it this last week, and as I say, hopefully I'll be able to leave it alone fairly soon and stop watching it. But it has been pretty good. I'll say that. The live episode, I think there's a live episode tomorrow, which I might watch, because that's always interesting, isn't it, to see if anything goes wrong. And the ones that I've watched the last couple of days have been pretty good. I've been watching the classic episode repeats on BBC4 as well, because that is stuff from the era that I was watching it and a fan of. But yeah, the stuff they've done for the anniversary, I'll tell you a few things. Um, I feel about that. The what's that red ribbon thing that's on the opening credits, where it's like a river of blood going through the Thames, or and then it comes up with a 40. Is that what that's meant to be? I don't know, but yeah, it's a bit strange, isn't it? But then obviously it's kind of foreshadowing, I guess, all the stuff they've done for the anniversary, which is spoiler alert if you haven't seen it yet. There is a car crashes into the Queen Vic and blows it up, and loads of people are inside and not sure who's going to live, who's going to die. I will say that episode where they did that and the build up to that, which was all to do with Ian and Cindy and all that stuff, was pretty badly done. I thought. I didn't think it was a very good episode. I thought it felt very clunky and awkward, and it felt like a live episode. Actually, it kind of felt like there was a lot of dead air and a lot of awkwardness and clunky dialogue. That episode, I would probably say, if you were giving that a rating on IMDb, I'd give it something like 6 out of 10. But the episode I've watched tonight was, I would say, an 8 out of 10. I'll give it its dues. I don't watch EastEnders anymore because, if I'm being honest, I don't enjoy it anymore. I'm not going to get into the reasons too much why. I don't want to be too negative, but yeah, I just don't think it's as good as it used to be. But the episode I watched tonight was very good. What they did with it, obviously, they covered a lot of ground. They covered Phil Mitchell's depression. They covered Nigel's dementia diagnosis and did that very well. And they always do very well at handling issues, of course. But yeah, the thing that really knocked it out of the park for me was the bit where Sharon is under some rubble or whatever in the Queen Vic, and suddenly, from out of nowhere, Anita Dobson appears in, completely done up as the ghost of Angie Watts. And honestly, it was just incredible. She had the full wig, she had the full makeup, she barely looked like she'd aged a day, and it was just so well done and so well acted as well. She was straight back into the character and doing sort of willing Sharon to sort of save herself and get out of the building. So that was amazing, and obviously social media absolutely caught fire when that happened. But it was so good, and obviously it's something for the old fans. The people like me who are old enough to remember when Den and Angie were in it. You're not going to bring Den back because obviously Leslie Grantham's dead, but that's got to be the second best thing. It was so well done. So yeah, get a bit back into EastEnders because of the anniversary. As I say, I don't intend for it to last. I'm hoping I will go back to watching better quality television once once this 40th anniversary stuff has finished. But they did say if you're suffering distress from anything in this episode over the closing credits, and actually, I do think I might have developed photosensitive epilepsy from the speed of the closing credits. What is all that about? Why did the closing credits have to go at a million miles an hour now? Has that been happening for a while, or is that just to do with the anniversary because they got to fit lots of names on? I don't know, but yeah, that was a bit weird. But yeah, very much enjoyed it, and probably watched a live episode, and we'll see if anybody makes a mistake, because I remember now, was it the last anniversary where one of the characters they accidentally said the name of the actor, which was the Ian Beale actor, Adam Woodyard, instead of the character's name? Because I remember I put something on Twitter about it. I think she says, how's Adam instead of how's Ian? I think that's what she said. And I did a tweet where it was a picture of Dale Cooper in the final shot of Twin Peaks, where he's smashed his head on a mirror and he's got blood coming out of his head. And it's the final scene of Twin Peaks where Carl McLaughlin says, "How's Annie?" I think, and which, unless if you're not a Twin Peaks fan, that would be completely lost on you. But it's to do with the fact that he's been possessed by Killer Bob, the villain, and or his soul's been taken, his body's been taken over by this evil killer. And I put the caption, "How's how's Adam?" And it got lots of likes, and it got retweeted by the main thing I remember with that was it was retweeted by was his name Ewan McIntosh, who played Big Keith in The Office. And I thanked him for it, and he replied, gave me a little thumbs up, and he passed away a couple of years ago, didn't he? Which I was a bit sad about. But yeah, I remember that. But yeah, I always tend to tune in when it's the anniversary episodes, and then just go back to not watching it. So yeah, EastEnders. So that's about it for episode 2 of the Radio Firestage podcast. Just before we wrap up, I looked up Ewan McIntosh on IMDb just after that last feature, and my mind is blown. Ewan McIntosh died a year ago today. He died sadly on the 19th of February 2024, so not quite as long ago as I thought. But the strange thing about that is this podcast is being recorded on the 19th of February, and I mentioned him because he responded to a tweet I'd done about EastEnders, and of course the 19th of February is the EastEnders anniversary date because that's the day it first started in 1985. So, wow, what are the chances of that? Very strange, very eerie, but yeah, sadly that's when he passed away. So, going to end it on that note, I'm afraid. Hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast. If you have enjoyed it, please subscribe, and hopefully I'll be speaking to you again soon. Bye bye.